So kind of leading into that, in regards to leadership and also how all of that information kind of comes down, I guess I thought it would be good to kind of talk about the different training and do we need to do a better job training our police officers? Are we training them enough? Are we training them on the right things? Or are we giving them enough opportunity to be trained and to get that time to know how to best interact with the community, and how do some of these changes, when a police chief comes in and says X, Y, Z, how do we get the whole police department to be on board with that, and execute it the way they want it to? So I guess, how does training really work in policing?
Well, I'll just touch on Georgia. In Georgia, you have Post, and Post is basically a governing body that controls the standards of what police officers must have, the training that they must complete before they are considered a peace officer in the state of Georgia. So all the department needs to do is meet these standards, and they can, basically give someone a gun in the bag and say, hey, you're a police officer. And I'm not. It's one of those things to where how much training are you? It's you got to almost do the job before you're gonna really figure out what you're gonna do. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you still have to have adequate training when it comes to laws and when it comes to enforcing those laws, interpreting the law.
And as laws change too, right? Because we see things change, and how do you make sure everybody gets on board with that?
Absolutely. And then not only just law, but you got to also do more training on, physical combat, and then on top of that, with equipment, gun safety, shooting. It's just so many things. Driving. It's so many things that you have to train an officer for. And I do think personally, some of the standards are lax, and I think
you think that some of the standards of the initial training is just not what it really needs to be?
Yeah, it's not where it needs to be, because I think for posts, some departments, they can just send a person there for about 3.5 months or 3 months. So we're talking like 12
so like
weeks.
Somebody like me who's never been a police officer,
in 12 weeks time,
in 12 weeks time become
you're
capable of doing everything.
Right. Now I will. There's a caveat. Like, you do have field training, which usually for some department it can last an additional 12 weeks. Okay. So you combine that, you're looking at about 24 weeks to 28 weeks. That's the minimum usually. Now some departments do 9 weeks field training. So you probably go somewhere around 21 to 30 weeks.
Okay. So maybe half a year of training before you're like ready
on your own. Yeah, on your own. And then where I started, they had their own academy, so they meet post standards, but then they go beyond that. Okay. So I had over, I think, 6.5 months
before you even went field training.
Before I even got to field training, it was 6.5 months of the academy, and we went to scenario after scenario, shooting and driving, and of course we did combat training, we did all types of things. And even doing that, in the law study and all that, I still don't think it's enough, because you're talking about so many different things. Shooting is something that's usually where you lose a lot of people in the academy, because a lot of people, they don't have the ability to shoot that well. You have to maintain a certain percentage in order to be a police officer. You can't just send anybody out there with a gun. They start shooting, and they don't hit their targets, and that's a bad thing for everybody. Right. Because now there's innocent bystanders that may get hit, and that still happens.
Right. Because even with the best training.
Right. Because the stress levels, it's not like you're on a line and somebody tells you to, all right, go. It's not like that when it's in real life. So that's one thing. Then you go to combat, and when you go to driving, you're still gonna lose more people, right? Because not everybody can drive that well, and not everybody can actually fight or put up a fight, right? So when you lose all those people in those scenarios, now you're just dwindling your numbers down more and more. And then you got the law side. You got, can you interpret the law? Right. Do you understand the law?
Can you remember all of these laws?
Right. Oh, well, I can tell you
well enough.
Nobody remembers all the laws. They have a book that they refer to, and it is your responsibility.
Yeah, so like I was saying before, all this training, when it comes to defensive tactics, when it comes to shooting, when it comes to driving, when it comes to studying the law and various other things. So when you have an academy, usually you're going to have people that's going to drop out because they fail out of one of these things. And so when you increase the training, you're gonna have probably
So you
more
think
people.
you'll even lose more if you
Oh
increase
yeah,
some
you're
of the
definitely, because I
training?
mean, the more things you train on, the more apt for somebody to fail at doing it. So you're gonna lose even more people.
Do you think that, like, when you talk about training, do you think that what needs to increase is, do you think that police officers need more time and more in-depth training on everything, or are there also things that they're not even getting trained on that they like do totally new topics and trainings need to happen, or is it that it's just not to the level and depth that it needs to be, or there's not enough time spent on it?
Well, I think the initial training definitely needs to be increased somewhat. I mean, I would like to see it probably at a year.
Okay.
It's probably
I mean, that's fair considering the amount of
right.
things that you guys do out there and with the serious nature. I don't
Right.
think it's unreasonable. I
Yeah.
mean, think about all the other people who have jobs that people's lives are in their hands. They have
Right.
significantly more than 6 months worth of training.
Yeah, I would like to see just the academy itself to go to a year, and I know a lot of people is probably looking at me like, really? It's like,
And you're
yeah.
talking about a year of training, not even in the field, just like a year of just
No,
spending
that's the
that.
academy. I think there's a lot of things that have to be expanded upon, particularly defensive tactics. I mean, you have, and this goes beyond just, and I just want to focus on just the academy right now when I'm talking what I'm talking about. You have a lot of people that either they don't know how to fight,
Right.
or even still, there's a proper way to do it when you're talking about defensive tactics, because it's just not about beating
Right.
someone to a pulp or anything like that.
Right.
You have to try to apprehend that person, restrain that person in a manner that is safe for them and you. You know, obviously you have to use force in order to gain compliance, but you need to have the ability to do so without causing great harm to yourself or them,
Right.
for the most part. So there definitely needs to be more time spent there when it comes to training.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest things, and then also de-escalation. That's another thing that
Right. That has to go right in hand with all of that too, right? Like in terms of apprehension of people,
right.
you want to try to not escalate a situation.
Right. You need more time to do these scenarios. You need more time to do all these things. So you're going to have to increase the training. And that's just for the academy. Now, I think the biggest thing is the annual, semi-annual
Reviews and things.
training.
Okay.
That's the thing that has to change.
So what is it right now? Like, what is
This
if you're already a police officer, how much training in a year do you get?
20 hours.
Okay. And that's including everything. So that's like
That's
shooting,
useful force. That's a couple legal updates. And then they choose a couple topics.
and does that happen once a year? Or
That's once a year.
so it's not even like once a month you guys have 8 hours. It's like once a year you get like a couple days where you're doing that.
Most departments is once a year. Officer's only going to shoot his gun mandatorily once a year. So some departments, they do twice a year. They do semi-annual. But, yeah, once a year, 20 hours. And it's not enough.
Right.
And you really need more time. And not just for training, for fitness as well.
Right.
You need this dedicated time that officers should train. I think officers should train every week.
Right.
I really do. I think they should train every week. But that's why I was saying that defunding early and funding, it's a slippery thing. Because
Right.
if you defund, there's not going to be the ability to train more.
Right. You're losing money for training, and you're also then, when you have police officers training, they're not able to respond to calls either. So
Exactly.
you need to increase your
Right.
total number so you have enough police officers when others are being
Right.
trained. So it's kind of a double-edged sword at that point.
Right.
But I think that that's a part that it sounds like really needs attention and funding. And I think that's also a lot of the problems that most people have with police these days comes in the situations where maybe better training or more de-escalation training or more of a quick review on an ongoing basis might help to resolve some of those issues. So if we really want to make policing and the community safer and whenever they're in contact with one another,
Right.
maybe we need to be okay with spending more money on some of this training to allow for that opportunity to improve that area.
Right. I mean, it's quite simple as that, because guaranteed, if you defund, if you take money away, there's not going to be more money for training, and there won't
Right.
be any more training.
And things might potentially get worse then in
it
that
could,
case.
because I mean, you're starting to. Police departments have to, try to prioritize outside of, meeting their standards from what state they're in. They got to prioritize what they want to train.
Right.
So if it's something that may need attention, but they can do without it because their budget, they're going to do without it. And, it's only going to negatively impact the community. So it's one of those things where people got to understand, you can't ask for one thing and then ask for it's kind of like asking for the opposite. Like, yeah, we want to take money away from you, but we also want you to have more training.
Right.
Like, well, it costs money
Right.
to get this training.
Right.
And then a lot of money, because like I said before, when you don't have those officers out there, now you're at a shortage to where they aren't going to be able to respond
Right.
as well, and now you also need more money to pay for the training.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't go hand in hand.
Right.
You got to kind of choose what you want. Do you want more training? And I know some people say, well, yeah, you can reappropriate funds other areas. And this is what I challenge them. I say, okay, if you telling me that I got to go a year in the police academy, and then I got to go another, I don't know how long, maybe 12 weeks, 15 weeks, or 9 weeks in field training to make $35,000-$40,000,
Right.
people might look at you like, that's a long time to give up just for that.
Right.
That's not a lot of money
Right.
for me to go train and go through all these different, tests just to make $40,000, you know.
Right.
And I know a lot of people say, well, people go to 4 years of college and that's all they're going to make. Yeah. And it sucks. It still sucks.
Right. Doesn't mean it's the best way of doing it
Right,
either.
yeah,
So.
right. There's problems there. So it's one of those things like, that method hasn't worked either. It's not going to work any better for a $40,000 job for 1 year or 1.5
Right,
years.
right.
And then, or if it's a situation where somebody's got to be physically fit and they got to go through this training on a monthly or weekly basis, all this training and all this extra stuff that outside of their job, they're going to be like, this isn't, I'm not getting paid enough
Right.
to warrant me to do all this stuff.
Right. Right.
And that's what people got to deal with. So, yeah, obviously, I would love as much training as we can get officers.
Sure.
But if we don't have the funds to do so, then I don't know how it's going to happen.
Right. How are we going to make things better if we're not going to? I hate to say that we have to spend money to make things better, but at some point we do, because what the current system is clearly is not working for either the police or the community.
No. It's
So the only way to do it is maybe we need to improve training to some level, and that is going to cost money, and defunding might not be the best answer to help in either regard of that.
No, and that's like, and I know I said earlier that I'm for it, and what I mean for it is the reappropriating.
Right.
You know,
We're refunding, not defunding, but
Right.
refunding
You
where
find-
the appropriate
right.
things might
You
be.
need to put money where you can, have the best impact.
Right.
And the thing about it is, it's really more than just the police that has to get refunded. It's a lot of things that has to start. Really, everybody probably end up needs more funding, teachers and all that.
Oh, of course.
So everybody needs more money. So, but there's not a lot of more money out there, which is why we need to change the way how we raise funds for these cities and local governments. We're gonna have to find a way to get more money, period, for these
Right.
local governments, for these state governments, because there's not enough money, and I don't mean by taxes either. So
Right.
there's gonna have to be a change in how we do government business in regards to things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different subject for another day
Right.
as well. So yeah, that's like I said, the training itself, of course, there needs to be more, and as often as you can give it. It's just,
So you think that like once a week, or I mean, do you think that even like how much time, or do you think it's more like there should be like in-person training, or is this just like a constant review, or like what do you think the best way about increasing training? Like where do you think that really the emphasis needs to be put?
Well, most of your encounters are probably going to be more, as a police officer, it's going to be more, I guess, for lack of a better word, or for my knowledge, is normal in a sense where you're not going to be, on the ground rolling around every day, and
Right.
you're not going to be shooting your gun every day unless you're in one of these high crime areas
Right.
where you're doing that more often than not, which hopefully you're not. But for the most part, you're not going to be doing that every day. So you need to be focusing more on de-escalation and some of the things you're dealing with on a daily basis when it comes to dealing with the communities and dealing with the public. So you
Right.
need more training there. And I think defensive tactics is probably one of the biggest thing I can think of, because the reason why officers reach for their equipment more and more and more
Right.
is because they lack the physical combat skills and defensive techniques too. Even I do,
Right.
because like I said before, you get about 6 months of your initial training.
Right.
And you might roll around that mat 2-3 hours out the whole year, and unless you go do your own stuff off the on your own time,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be proficient,
Right.
or at least have
Or you
the
might also not
confidence-
feel confident,
Right,
and then you
in
start
your own
making
abilities.
decisions that you might not normally
And
do.
the
so.
second guessing is something police officers. The more second guessing the police officer does, the more apt that they're gonna end up seriously hurt or dead,
Or hurting somebody else as well.
or that too.
Right.
So it's one of those things where we have to find a way to find time for officers to do these things on the job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you're gonna need more funding to do that.
Right.
Unfortunately, because you need more police officers. Because when you don't have police officers doing that, they need to be training, and if the other one's not training, they need to be on the street. So it's one of those things where you're gonna have to find, like I said, either reappropriate the funds in these areas
Right.
or find more funding. So it's really a slippery thing when people say, "Well, we want to defund." Well, if you want to defund, then just understand that they're not going to get any better at de-escalation. They're not going to get any better at defensive tactics. They're not going to get any better at shooting anybody
Right.
in terms of having officers shoot at people that don't need to be shot at. You
Right.
know, they're not going to get better at any of this stuff. So the less they have, the less you're going to get on these results.
Sure.
And that's as simple as that. So you need more funding in that regard. So I hate to say it, but it's kind of going around in a circle with it because it's so hard. Because in one aspect, you want to say, you know, we want to find different ways to refund some of these other areas like the mental health and having departments for them, but I don't see how you're gonna be able to take all that money or where you're gonna be able to take that money at in policing, because like I said, yeah, there is some waste. I'm not saying that some departments may not have wasted some money or maybe spent money on things they shouldn't have spent money on.
Sure. As with every business, there's somebody probably who doesn't have the best budget.
Absolutely.
or-
But is it such amount that it's going to make a significant difference where now all of a sudden we can fund a whole entirely new department?
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I think some of it too might be that it might be wise to get some of the people who are making the decisions to actually be out, maybe experiencing what it's like, so that they know where the training might be lacking, and maybe there needs to be a little bit more exposure on all sides, so that it's like,
I do believe that everybody on any council should go through the Citizen Police Academy.
Okay.
I do think that. I mean, anybody, I think anybody that serves on any of the city councils, any of the county councils or anything, I think they should go through those things.
Sure.
And that doesn't have to be long. I'm pretty sure those are only like 2-3 weeks, if that. And I think once they get that experience, they'll kind of understand a little bit more about why certain decisions get made. And they can also maybe they can figure out, well, this is not
Right,
working.
right.
Like, this is not something we want. So can we find another solution
Right,
for it? So
right.
to give them an opportunity to, evaluate.
Right.
Things.
It's not only to learn, but also to understand, like, is this the right?
Is this what we want to do?
Training, yeah.
And so I think they should, do that. I think that should be a requirement. If you're gonna make all these requirements of the police, you should be required to go through some of
Right. You should
a
know
very
what
small
has
bit of
to
what
do
they
with
go
it.
through. So
Yeah.
I think that's something that they should do.
Yeah.
Yeah.